Dear students, welcome to this lecture. Today our topic for deliberation is conflict resolution model developed by William Zartman. This lecture will enable you to have fundamental understanding about Zartman's model of conflict resolution. Moreover, this lecture will enable you to comprehend the applicability and limitations of Zartman's model of conflict resolution in the contemporary international relations. Dear students, before going through this model, let us know about who is William Zartman. Zartman is Jacob Balestin Distinguished Professor Emeritus of International Organization and Conflict Resolution at the Paul H. Nitze School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University. He is the author of many works on North Africa as well as Sub-Saharan African politics and regional relations. Prior to his long tenure at SAIS, he was on the faculty of International Studies at the University of South Carolina and then professor of politics at New York University. During his career, he has been a distinguished fellow of the United States Institute of Peace, Olin Professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, Eli Halvey Professor at the Institute for Political Studies in Paris, and has taught or lectured in universities across the Middle East, Africa, and Europe, in China, and the University of the Andes. Some of his prominent works are Collapsed States, the Disintegration and Restoration of Legitimate Authority, Peacemaking in International Conflict, International Negotiation, Actors, Structure, Process, Values, Power and Negotiation, Preventive Negotiation, Avoiding Conflict Escalation, Getting It Done, Post-Agreement Negotiation and International Regimes, Rethinking the Economics of War, the Intersection of Need, Creed and Creed. Dear students, now after having a brief introduction about William Zartman, let us have a brief look on conflict resolution mechanism in international relations. The field of conflict resolution emerged as a specialized field from the 1950s onwards and rapidly became a broad, fast-growing interdisciplinary academic field. According to Jacob Burkovich, conflict resolution is essentially studying, quote unquote, the phenomena of conflict and analyze ways to bring it under control, bringing their insights and concepts to bear on actual conflicts, be they domestic or international, so as to foster better and more effective relations among states and peoples. Correspondingly, conflict resolution embodies ideas, theories, and methods that can improve our understanding of conflict and our collective practice of reduction in violence and enhancement of political process for harmonizing interests. Conflict resolution is thus not only an academic tool to analyze conflict, but also one that exceeds the academic nature to a more practical one in how to manage international conflict. Two of the most commonly employed methods to manage and ultimately dissolve conflicts in international relations are negotiation and mediation. One of the most commonly employed methods in conflict resolution is that of negotiation. There are essentially two approaches to the study and practice of negotiation. One, longest standing, holds that the key to a successful resolution of conflict lies in the substance of the proposals for a solution. Parties resolve their conflict by finding an acceptable agreement, more or less a midpoint between the positions through compromise. The second holds that the key to successful conflict resolution lies in the timing of efforts for resolution. Parties resolve their conflict only when they are ready to do so, when alternative, usually unilateral, means of achieving a satisfactory result are blocked and the parties find themselves in an uncomfortable and costly predicament. At that point, they grab onto proposals that usually have been in the air for a long time and that only now appears attractive. Dear students, preliminary work in the field of conflict resolution focused primarily on what proposals for solution should consist of. In recent decades, scholars, policymakers, or whoever interested in resolving conflicts have deliberated about the right timing for such efforts. In other words, what does it mean to say that a conflict is ripe for a resolution, or that the right time has come to seek negotiations? Why should one time be any better than another, and if it is, what makes it so? These are some of the basic questions that come to mind when examining the phenomena known as ripeness. There is a common sense notion that intervention into violent situations or negotiation of violent conflicts is more likely to succeed at some times than at others, or in some situations or sets of circumstances rather than others. As mentioned by Robert L. Rothstein, the analytical and practical debate about the issue of timing has been dominated by William Zartman's powerful and popular metaphor of ripe moment for negotiations. Zartman is a prolific scholar who has offered remarkable understanding and insight about conflict negotiation and peace. He has written extensively about the ripe moment for negotiation. Zartman suggests that ripeness is only a condition necessary but not sufficient for the initiation of negotiations. Dear students, let's have a look on Zartman's ripeness theory. The origins of the theory of ripeness go as far back as to 1974, when Henry Kissinger, while being US Secretary of State, commented in the New York Times that a stalemate is the most propitious condition for settlement. Stalemate is one of the components of theory of ripeness. When Kissinger made this statement, he referred to the idea that in a conflict situation, a certain kind of stalemate should be given in order to be able to reach a settlement between the belligerents. The notion was taken up by a range of academics, specifically William Zartman, who started publishing on the topic in 1978 in his book The Negotiation Process, Theories and Applications, and who eventually established the theory of ripeness in academia through multiple refinements. The essence of the theory is best summarized by Zartman himself when he stated that, quote unquote, parties consider positively the notion of conflict resolution through direct or mediated negotiation when they perceive the conditions of ripeness. So, what exactly does ripeness mean? Many conflict management scholars had written on the process of peace negotiations and the different modes to end violent conflict. The theory of ripeness concentrates on one specific point in this context. It deals with the right timing of the initiation of peace talks during an armed conflict. As Haas summarized it, what is meant by ripeness is the existence of prerequisites for diplomatic progress, that is, circumstances conducive for negotiated progress or even solution. In Zartman's opinion, the moment to seize an opportunity for peace talks by an external third party, bringing the belligerents to negotiating table, has to be ripe for the negotiations to be sincere. This does not mean, though, that if there was a ripe phase, this guarantees a successful outcome to the peace talks. Ripeness is thus defined as a necessary but not a sufficient condition for the successful resolution of violent conflicts. Without ripeness, a successful outcome of the peace efforts is impossible. However, with ripeness, success is not a given but rests under the further influence of additional conditional variables. For the sake of illustration, one might draw upon the example of a fruit. Let us picture an avocado. For an avocado to be enjoyable, the avocado has to be ripe. If an avocado is harvested too early, it is not enjoyable. If the avocado is harvested too late, it is rotten. There is, however, a phase in which the avocado is ripe to be harvested. This is what is meant by explaining that a situation has to be ripe so that peace negotiations have a potential to be successful. If peace negotiations are started too early or too late, they will not be successful. Dear students, the theory of ripeness as described in existing literature consists of two levels of variables for the definition of ripeness. First level variables are mutually hurting stalemate (MHS) and a sense of way out (SWO). Second level variables are objective elements and persuasion. This means that if an MHS exists in an intrastate conflict and further this is connected to an SWO by the individual parties to the conflict, then ripeness is given and it is possible for the actors to decide to negotiate sincerely in order to potentially end the violence. Dear students, the term mutually hurting stalemate or MHS characterizes a situation in which the belligerents are locked in a conflict in which it does not seem possible to achieve victory for either side. This is what is referred to as a stalemate in a conflict. No progression can be achieved anymore. A deadlock between the belligerents exists. The deadlocked situation has to be painful to both sides of the conflict. That is hurting. A hypothetical cost-benefit analysis of each party would come to the conclusion that the conflict is hurting more than benefiting the individual parties to the conflict, and that there is no hope of turning the dynamics of the conflict around, so that victory might be possible after all. It has to be clear to the belligerents that the current situation is not sustainable and does more harm than good to its own people, own troops, or own elites. Important for the concept of ripeness is the notion that the hurting stalemate is to be mutual, which means it must be perceived by all belligerents. None of the belligerents must feel it can still win the conflict by victory, and the cost of maintaining the current situation has to be too high to afford. It is important to note that mutual in this context does not refer to a symmetric perception. The intensity of the perception can vary between the belligerents. A stalemate can take different forms. Zartman contrasts two images about the stalemate. The first image is a plateau. Zartman describes this as quote unquote a flat and unending terrain without relief. That is, the respective relevant actors in the conflict see no end to the violence, the crisis, the situation. They just see an infinite continuation of the current deadlocked state, which is the stalemate. If no potential victory is in sight, the motivation to fight and continue the struggle loses its attractiveness. The second image Zartman refers to is a precipice, which is the exact opposite of plateau. A precipice constitutes a point that signifies a sudden and significant worsening of the situation. A precipice can emerge from within the conflict, which would mean that structural changes occur, or external actors can create the precipice by using the means of power politics. An example for the former precipice emerges from within the conflict is, for instance, the sudden death of the leader of a group. The second kind of precipice is created by an external actor. This could be a mediator with the intention to manipulate the situation. He or she could, for instance, threaten military action against one of the actors in order to change the balance of the current state of affairs. In both cases, the belligerent actor has lost the hope for victory. Dear students, an MHS, mutually hurting stalemate, is not sufficient for the establishment of ripeness. A second variable is of crucial importance, the SWO. The reason lies in the notion that a cost-benefit analysis does not account for the security dilemma, because even when the cost of war outweighs the incentives to attack, uncertainty about the opponent's intentions can undermine cooperation. Therefore, the MHS is a necessary variable, but it is not sufficient for the explanation of ripeness. Dear students, an SWO, that is sense of a way out, signifies that the belligerents discern that a negotiated solution to the conflict can potentially be found. Among the conflicting parties, the perception has to prevail that a bargained settlement could satisfy the underlying needs of each and that such a settlement could be achieved. This requirement has twofold implications. The first implication is that each party to the conflict has to have a consensus among itself. As often pointed out in the academia, it is hardly possible to find an actor in such a conflict that has one opinion. Normally, each group is fragmented in, for example, hardliners and softliners, or the fighters and the intellectual heads, etc. Thus, most groups display rather heterogeneous structures. Thus, the crucial point is that the dominant deciding group is of the opinion there might be a way out of the conflict that makes sense and is beneficial to the group. It does not help if this opinion prevails among a small group that is insignificant when it comes to decisions. Such notion can only succeed if the predominant individuals of the actor display an SWO and believe they can also sell the way out to its other members. Those two first level variables, the existence of an MHS and an SWO on both sides to the conflict, are primarily determining whether ripeness exists at a specific point in the conflict, so that it would make sense to initiate peace talks, since negotiations at this point would have the potential to be led sincerely by the belligerents. This would mean that the belligerents are not abusing the proposal for peace talks, using the chance to re-strengthen themselves, but actually believe in the potential for peace agreement. Thus, in a situation in which MHS and an SWO exists, the conditions for ripeness are fulfilled. Dear students, further, the theory of ripeness accounts for a second level variables, which are objective elements and persuasion. These second level variables impact the first level variables. Objective elements refer to quantifiable and measurable proof that defines whether a belligerent objectively still has the possibility to win the war by victory. Examples for this are the number of soldiers, of weapons, the financial resources available, or the state of nutrition of the troops. Especially with respect to objective elements, the mediator can play a crucial role. A mediator can identify objective elements and disclose them to the belligerents. Persuasion. Dear students, this is where the other second level variable, persuasion, comes in. Persuasion appeals to the perception of the belligerents and can thus be seen as a diplomatic tool for conflict managers. Ripeness depends on the perception of the actors involved. Even if all objective elements speak against a potential victory of one of the actors, the perception of such actors might differ. They might still be convinced of their potential to win and thus are not able to feel an MHS or perceive an SWO. In such a case, ripeness cannot exist. Dear students, furthermore, Zartman expanded his own theory by including mutually enticing opportunities as a potential substitute for an MHS. The idea behind mutually enticing opportunities is that positive incentives, not only negative incentives, can motivate conflict transformation. The basis for mutually enticing opportunities, that is MEOs, as Zartman expressed it, that the issue of the conflict becomes depasse, no longer justifying bad relations with the other party or the mediator that it imposed. Or the attraction lies in the possibility of winning more cheaply than by conflict, or else a possibility of sharing power that did not exist before. MEOs, mutually enticing opportunities, thus constitute a form of positive inducements which can range from expansion of power to economic gains or political achievements. MEOs is a possibility to enlarge the pie of gains and by that to turn a zero-sum solution into a win-win situation for the belligerents. It is possible to explain this addition to the theory by drawing upon the example of an orange. The issue of conflict is an orange that both parties to the conflict want to have in their possession. In order to turn the issue of the conflict away from the zero-sum solution to a win-win situation, alternative ways of solving the conflict have to be found that are acceptable to both the parties. There are three possibilities to do so. Firstly, one could reach out for a side payment by a third party, which would mean that a third party buys another orange, so that both parties can have one. Secondly, the way of compensation could be made non-specific. This option also includes a side payment by a third party that compensates one of the parties to the conflict for the loss of the orange by paying for it. Thirdly, one could use the method of bridging. This means that we try to find out what really is at stake for each of the parties to the conflict through, for example, track to diplomacy and then prioritize. Regarding the example of the orange, this means that, for example, the result of such effort could be that one party actually strives for the peel of the orange while the other for the inside. Through problem-solving workshops, one could find out these differences in priorities and eventually find acceptable solution to the conflict for all actors involved. Dear students, while ripeness has not always been used to open negotiations, there have been occasions when it has come into play, as identified by both analysts and practitioners. Dear students, different authors have written about the theory of ripeness and suggested refinements to the theory. Others have identified a lack of explanatory power to certain aspects. One part of academic challenges concentrates on the role of the third party regarding the theory of ripeness. Why do mediators come in as third parties to a conflict? With what interest and at what time do they do so? A range of motivating factors for mediators can be thought of. A mediator might want to intervene into a civil war because of pure power reasons. He or she might see an advantage through the intervention, be it because of regional instability, resource interest in the target country, or the usage of the civil war for so-called proxy conflict. Other reasons might be international responsibility in the face of humanitarian catastrophes provoked through a protracted ongoing civil war. A third motivating factor might simply be that the mediator feels he could be needed and successful. However, independent of what the initial motivation is to intervene, what is of interest in this context is to how to motivate the mediator to pay attention to ripeness. What is the line of argument to convince potential mediator to be sensitive to the concept of ripeness? A rather moral challenge to the theory of ripeness derives from the idea that due to the concept of an MHS, timing for conflict settlement depends on raising the level of conflict until a stalemate is reached and then begins to hurt. This is sobering conclusion. It suggests that the settlement depends more on the push of a hurting stalemate than on the pull of an anticipated attractive outcome. This purely negative picture of the implications of the theory of ripeness does not hold. Dear students, while concluding this lecture, we can say that the investigation into ripeness and the attempt to turn an intuitive notion into an analytical concept was undertaken by Zartman with the aim of producing a useful tool for practitioners as well as analysts. Parsimony, explicitness, and precision are particularly important, not only in developing common terms and meanings so that the object can be discussed and used, but also in bringing out hidden implications and refocusing inquiry on refinements and new areas uncovered by a precision of the concept. If the limitations on a concept are bigger than the concept itself, one should start looking elsewhere. But limitations become particularly interesting when they open up the possibilities and alternatives for better analysis and better practice. It is in that hope that this presentation will open fruitful discussion and applications of the use of hurting stalemates and the creation of compelling opportunities. Dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding conflict resolution model developed by Ira William Zartman. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Thank you.